Thanks be to God. It's a rough one. It's whenever people say to me, this is a very easy test. And I grew up in the South. I grew up in the hills of Arkansas. And so people would claim, they would say, I believe it's the Bible Belt. I believe the Bible. I believe it word for word. It's all true or it's none true. I believe it word for word. I believe it from Genesis to maps. I even believe the leather is real. And they thought they meant that. They thought they meant that. But I've since learned, since growing up and actually having read the Bible, that people who say that haven't. That the Bible isn't, we treat it as, that this isn't a pejorative thing for other traditions. But there are traditions that tell us that the gods or the spirits or the ancestors or whoever deliver a message. And it's word for word, and it should never be tampered with. The Book of Mormon supposedly is just delivered by the angel Moroni, and it's found by the prophet, and he's divinely given the means to translate it, and that's that story. That's not the Bible story. The Quran is supposed, the angel Gabriel dictates it word for word to the prophet, and he writes it down without any mistakes, and that's their story. That's not the Bible story. The Bible is much more complex than that. There is a text called A Course in Miracles, and a woman in the late 60s, early 70s just supposedly channeled Jesus. And she wrote it down word for word. That's that story, but it's not the Bible story. The Bible is the story of relationships. The Bible is the story about people thinking and asking questions and changing their minds and learning things as they go along. The Bible is people wrestling with God. Wrestling to make sense of things that just seem to not make any sense. People trying to find God in the midst of warfare, and in the midst of disease, and in the midst of slavery, and in the midst of oppression, and people trying to say, God has to be good. We could suffer without any God. So there has to, if there is a God, God has to be good. And yet our experience isn't good. And so in that dichotomy, they ask questions, and they wrestle, and they pray, and they cry out, and they tell their stories. And then someone else is having a very different sort of experience, and they tell their stories. And someone else is having a very different experience, and someone tells their story. And then eventually people write it down, and then later someone else collects all of these and puts it together. And then later councils say, these are what we're going to call sacred texts. And then there's translation after translation after translation. It is a communal event. It is a constant awakening. That's what the Bible is. It's people asking questions, and people daring to think beyond what they had heard before. And so people ask questions, and they tell their stories, and they ask why, and they wrestle, and then they try to find some peace in the middle of all that. A wonderful example of that is the 22nd Psalm. It seems to be on Jesus' mind at the last, when he is suffering there at Lauderdale. But the 22nd Psalm begins, my God, why have you abandoned me? Have you ever prayed that prayer? Have you ever felt like, I forget now, who was it? Was it Catherine of Siena? One of the great mystics said, because she assumed that all things sort of happened certainly on God's watch, that if God didn't cause them, God certainly allowed them. And she was having a terrible, terrible experience, one after the other. And she said in one of her prayers, God, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few of them. Have you ever prayed that prayer? My God, why have you abandoned me? But what I love about the 22nd Psalm is that is how it begins. That is not how it ends. The 22nd Psalm begins, my God, why have you abandoned me? And then the psalmist begins to retell stories, these stories that other people have told, about how in the midst of their troubles they found relief. In the midst of their suffering they found hope. And in the midst of overwhelming defeat after defeat after defeat, they still experience some kind of victory. And so at the end of the 22nd Psalm, that begins, my God, why have you abandoned me? I remember when you did this great thing, and this great thing, and this great thing, and this great thing, and this great thing. And you know what? That's what you are. You're in the great thing business. So I'm going to praise you. and generations to come will praise you because I am praising you. That's the 22nd Psalm. It's my God, why have you abandoned me? Oh, that's right, you haven't. And that is the psalm on Jesus' mind in the most difficult moment of his life, at the end of his life. And he starts to sing or hum or pray the 22nd Psalm. My God, why have you abandoned me? That has to be what we're sort of hearing tonight in this story from the book of Judges. We see this man who hates his enemies. He hates the Ammonites. And so it is his assumption that God hates his enemies, the Ammonites. Isn't it funny how religious people think that? How religious people think, if I hate someone, God must hate that someone. I grew up hearing, I grew up in a religious family, religious community, and so I knew all the rules, but I didn't understand all the rules. Like the commandment to not take God's name in vain. I always assumed that meant you shouldn't swear. But I couldn't understand why that was such a big deal. Like, people did it. They didn't seem to be bad people. The world didn't seem to come apart because people were swearing. I didn't understand why you couldn't say a word that we give meaning to anyway. And then, when I was very young, a very young adult, and I see on television Jerry Falwell say that the AIDS crisis is God's punishment to LGBT people, mostly gay men. That's when it clicked. That's what's taking God's name in vain is. Now I know what it is. And yeah, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't take an offer to a vicious gang, and now she is being carried out under the cover of darkness, never see her home again. Forgive her if she looks over her shoulder through teary eyes just 1 second. That is apparently an unforgivable deed, and she is turned to a pillar of salt. Lot has offered his virgin daughters, not even so much as a slap on the wrist or an insult. Mrs. Lot looks back at her home one last time, killed. All right. Whatever else these ancient stories are, they are not a model for contemporary ethics. So anyway, so Lot and his daughters now, they keep going forward without mom because she's history, and they find a cave. And so they hold up in a cave, because you just can't walk all the time, you've got to rest eventually. So they find this cave to rest in for safety. And when they were leaving, they didn't have time to take anything. They just had to get up and leave. They couldn't even look back. And so they get to the cave. Well, apparently this is the one cave in the entire area that contains a well-stocked bar. Because Lot drinks until he passes out from the bar in the cave. And the daughters start conspiring. They're like, you know what if we never leave this cave? What, did rocks fall behind you when you walk in? You walk in, you can walk out. But they don't think about it. What if we never get out of this cave? And our dad is the only man we ever see again in our lives. Oh, this, you know what, we should, while he's passed out, we should seduce him. So that we can get pregnant and so that we won't die childless. And the other one's like, you know what, that's a good plan. And so they flip a coin to decide who will do it first. And so the winner, the loser, whichever, does just that. Well, the next night, it's the other one's turn. Lucky for the plan, Dad gets drunk to the point of passing out again from the well-stocked bar in the cave. And so the other daughter seduces the drunk dad. And the justification has always been, he was drunk, he didn't know. I think if you're so drunk you don't know who your daughter is, you're probably too drunk to finish what the plan was. But I didn't write the story. So, they do it, they conceive, and here's the point of the story. Here's the point. There's been no wine, no roses, no violins, no dating, no love, not even any mutual attraction. How anyone got sexuality out of this story is amazing to me. Well, actually, you can blame Augustine. But we've got a lot of stuff wrong, by the way. But this isn't about love, this isn't about attraction. It's about the conclusion of the story. And the conclusion is that these daughters who have conceived through incest in this cave, who their children become the forebears of who? The Moabites and the Ammonites. Our enemies! This is a racial ethnic slur. This is saying the people we hate are so vile, they were even conceived out of incest. They, from their beginnings, are no good. And of course the question is, well, who would conceive an incest? A whole people, a whole community. Why would that happen? Well, let me tell you how it happened. Once upon a time, lots of people, and blah, blah, blah. So this whole string of events leads to why these people are despicable. Why we get to hate them. Because at their core, they're no good. These are Jephthah's enemies. He's grown up in the story. He's heard always that those people are beyond the reach of God's love. He's heard always that those people are our enemies and they're also God's enemies. He's heard that those people are at their very core no good. They were conceived in evil. And so he prays to God, help me defeat these evil enemies. Now, he strikes a bargain. He says, and you know what, God, if you will help me slay and destroy these people that you hate as well as I do, because that's what God is, the co-hater of my enemies. If you will help me slay these people that you hate as much as I do, I will reward you for helping me by killing one more person. If you will help me kill 3,000, I will make it 3,001 just to honor you. Hallelujah. Now, Jephthah is successful. Now, he may be successful because he's a better strategist than the other team. He may be successful because he's got more warriors, or because they're fresher, or better fed, or whatever, but he has attributed it to his bargain made with God. And sure enough, he comes home. He only has one kid. He lives. How many people do you think are living in his house? He says, whoever, the first person comes out, the first thing that comes out of my house. Except this story is written during a time when human sacrifice is still pretty normative. And some translations of the text doesn't say whatever, but says whoever. And so it's like, so people say, well, maybe just he meant the first thing, like the first chicken. Well, okay, if I will kill the first chicken that comes out of my house, but what comes out instead of a chicken is my daughter, I immediately go into renegotiation, right? You know, God, when I said whatever, you know I'm in a chicken, right? You know, you didn't think I was going to commit murder in my own family, right? No, not Jephthah. Jephthah is a fundamentalist. Jephthah believes in the letter of the law. And the law of the agreement he struck was, the first thing that comes rolling out of my house, I will destroy to praise God. And the first thing that comes out is his daughter, his only child. And he loves her. Of course he loves her. But he is so brainwashed by the hatred that has been attributed to religion that he actually harms a person he loves. And stops seeing her as a human and starts seeing her as a sacrifice. And that is a tragic story. But it's even more tragic than you may realize. Because the story began, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. The story begins with God is with Jephthah. The story begins with God is already present to and part of Jephthah's life. Jephthah doesn't have to strike any bargain with God. The story begins with the presence of God, the Spirit of God, the energy of God, the power of God comes upon Jephthah. The story begins with right where Jephthah is, God is. No bargain is necessary. I don't have to sacrifice anybody for God's love. I don't have to sacrifice anything for God's love. I don't have to hurt or harm or denigrate anybody to be in right relationship with God. Because from the beginning, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jephthah. How many children have been sacrificed? How many children have been sacrificed? Thrown out of their homes, thrown on the street, thrown out of their churches. How many children, how many homes have been destroyed because someone said, I heard that God hates who these people I am supposed to love are. God said, I should hate them. And I am so scared of that God, I'm going to follow that God's rules rather than following through the love that I have for my family. The first sermon I ever heard Father John Henry preach was at the Cathedral of Dallas, Texas in the mid-90s. And he preached a sermon about the god Baal. And how it was common for people when the crops weren't producing, because Baal was sort of a fertility deity, a nature deity. So if you would sacrifice your child to Baal, Baal would bless the crops. The rain would come, the divine semen would come, and impregnate the earth mother, and her children, the crops would start coming forth. And so what that God required, though, was sacrifice, was death. And Father John said, every mother who had her crying child torn from her arms must have been cursing Baal under her breath. How every mother must have hated the God that required such a hateful act. And then he said, so many Christians are really idolaters because they are worshiping Baal. They're calling Baal God, but it is Baal, the God that requires pain and devastation, that causes us to give up on our families and our loved ones, that causes us to hate rather than to love. When I came out to my grandmother, I forgot to mention I'm gay. When I came out to my grandmother when I was 19, I told her I'm gay, I went to bed. Not much else to say after that. She woke me up the next morning. My grandmother, child of the Depression, 8th grade education, Hills of Arkansas, lifelong homemaker. She woke me up the next morning and she said, I just want to say, if I have ever said anything that has hurt you, I am so sorry. And I decided right then, if God isn't as good as my grandmother, I don't need God. Not too much later, I was at a Pentecostal service, a spiritual renewal, a revival sort of service. And I went up to the altar call, and I prayed. And I said, God, this is your one chance. This is your one chance. If this is wrong, fix it. I'm here, I've come forward. If this is wrong, fix it. And if you're not going to fix it, I'm not responsible. I'm not going to feel guilty. I'm just not going to feel guilty. You have your chance. You can strike me straight right now. Heal it if you want to, or leave me alone about it. Tears, prayer, dancing in the Spirit, the whole stuff. In fact, there's a little period where I don't remember much, because then the next thing I'm on the floor and looking at the whole little experience like happens in those situations. But what I remember from all of that is a voice, a response. Not an audible voice. When you hear an audible voice and no one's talking, that's medication time. But that silent knowing that comes from somewhere inside, the spirit of truth that just resonates throughout your body somehow, and the message is heard even though there is no audible voice. That's the voice I heard. And the voice said very clearly, verbatim, I've said it 100 times in my life, I'll say it 100 more, I'll never forget it. It said very simply, not even God can heal what is not sick. Now, that God did not require Jephthah to do this. Even if Jephthah in his zeal promised God is crying, mother's tears, saying, please don't do this. I didn't ask you to do this. Remember, the story begins with the Spirit of the Lord is already with Jephthah. You don't have to sacrifice anything. You just have to accept what it already is. 1 John 4:16 says, God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God, and God lives in them. You don't have to hate to get God's favor. You don't have to hate to experience divine love. That's the wake-up call. That is the wake-up call for the church. That is the wake-up call for our families. That is the wake-up call in our spiritual lives. Is you don't have to earn God's love. That's what grace is. It's freely given. You can't earn it. You can't lose it. It's already there from the beginning of your story. The Spirit of the Lord has come upon you. And so the wake-up call is to get past the anger, to get past the hate, to get past the self-loathing, to get past all of the stuff, and to do something new. A new way of trusting God's goodness within you. A new way of trusting that all-inclusive and unconditional love that leaves no one out for any reason. One of the contributors to the prophet Isaiah said, behold, I do a new thing. Do you not perceive it? That's what MCC of the Palm Beaches is. That's what your life is. It is a new thing. It is a new way to say to the world, God is love, and we are the ones, when we say it, who mean it. God is love. God is love. God isn't a reason for hate. To use God's name to justify hate is to use God's name in vain. God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God, and God lives in them. MCCPB, you are being called to wake up to the love of God within you and to share it fearlessly, because this is a new kind of church. This is a new day. This is a new kind of ministry. We aren't replicating the Baptists. They've got the Baptist thing under control. We're not duplicating the Pentecostals. They've got the Pentecostal thing under control. We're not even duplicating my blessed tradition, Anglicanism. They've got it under control. We've been called to do a new thing, to be a new witness to the all-inclusive and unconditional love of God. And so, MCC of the Palm Beaches, arise and shine. Your light has come. Arise and shine. Your light has come. Stand to your feet, MCC of the Palm Beaches. Stand up. Stand up. Arise and shine. Your light has come. 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 Share that light.